Michael, welcome to Landscape Photography World. How are you going?
I'm doing well. How are you, Grant?
Yeah, very good, very good. As some people might notice, with my background, I'm sitting in my motorhome out at Broken Hill, which is in the far west of New South Wales today. So it's something a little bit different. I don't always get a chance to do these from when I'm traveling, but when I do, and I'm in a town, well, Broken Hill's a city, but when I'm in a city and traveling, then it, it becomes possible. How about yourself? You're in Texas, I believe, Dallas, Fort Worth,
Yep,
or
Fort
somewhere
Worth,
around
Dallas, Fort Worth, Metroplex, whatever you want to call it. The airport's about 30 minutes between me and Dallas.
there? Okay,
I'm on the
yeah,
western side of the Metroplex.
sure. So, why is Michael Rung a landscape photographer?
Yeah, so this is one of those questions we were talking about before we hit record that I knew was coming, and I probably haven't mulled it over as much as I should have. But ironically, I have been thinking about this in the last month or so and even longer. But shameless plug, I just put a blog post up recently about why I shoot.
Yep.
It was a question posed on the landscapes photographer worldwide Discord, and it got me thinking. And for me, I think like many people, your motivations and your goals and everything may change over time. But for me, photography at its ultimate core, and not to be the cliche, but it's my mental escape, my mental therapy. It's where I
Sure,
find
sure.
my sense of mindfulness that I seem to struggle to find anywhere else in life. That's really the biggest piece that I get out of it. And one of the things I talked about in that blog post is how those motivations have changed over time. When I first started out, I had this grand vision of being, and I think I wrote it in the post, but it makes me cringe now, but I wanted to be a travel influence photographer and travel to all these amazing places and
And get paid for doing it.
hotels and
Yeah.
right, yeah, why not? But ugh, now I look back on that and wonder what I was thinking. But so originally it was starting off with that. And of course, the usual wanting to share my travels and experiences with my family and my friends. What really got me into photography was moving to Texas and being in a completely new area and just going out and exploring. And
Mhm.
it's really the first time I'd gone out and hiked since, honestly, since I was probably a kid,
Yep.
exploring the woods in my parents' neighborhood. I was starting to play around just with the camera phone and that. And then through work, I had the opportunity to start doing some overseas traveling. And that's what spurred the whole I want to be a travel photographer and everything.
Yeah.
But over time, that shifted. And I still enjoy sharing my experiences and what I've seen and what I've witnessed with others, especially those that I know haven't had the opportunities to have
Mm.
those experiences firsthand. But like right now, I had mentioned it's been a hectic couple of weeks. There's been a lot going on in the personal side of life again,
Yeah, sure.
and I've got that itch. I just want to be out in nature where it's calm and quiet, and I can get off on my own with the camera and just lose myself. And so, I think at the core, it's for my heart and soul. And in addition to that, it's how can I share that with the people that I love and care about the most.
Yeah, nice, nice. One of the other things that strikes me, not just about your photography, but in general, your communication style, you do a lot of writing and blogging. How did that start, and what role do you see that it has as part of your photography?
I don't really know what started it necessarily, other than just, again, oh, I should have a blog, so let me do a blog. I've always enjoyed writing. Again,
Yep,
when I was a kid, I would write all kinds of crazy short stories and
cool.
everything. But again, as I moved into adulthood, all that stuff fell by the wayside, and all my writing was related to emails and PowerPoint presentations and things like that for work.
Mm.
Part of it is it's scratching another creative itch that I used to enjoy. I'm not writing fiction. I do believe in authenticity in my writing, but it's still, I try to get a little creative with the phrasing and the words I'm using and trying to tell the stories of my experiences. And then that's a big part of it too, especially this year I've done a lot of writing, whether
Mm.
it be trip reports after the fact that sometimes tie into videos on my YouTube channel, other times don't. I'm trying to do a better job, frankly, of taking the random jumble of thoughts and ideas and opinions and everything in my mind and putting them on paper, so to speak, writing about why authenticity in photography is so important to me, especially nature photography these days with the advent of AI
Sure.
stepping things up even further in terms of being able to easily, misrepresent your experiences or just create experiences that you never actually had. So
Yeah.
it's, I feel, I think at this point of my journey, I hope at least that I have thoughts and opinions that may be of interest to others. But again, it's another creative outlet. The video is another creative outlet for me. It's something where I can learn new technical skills, which I'm geeky and nerdy when it comes to the tech stuff. But it's ultimately that creative piece that if I can't
Mm.
get out with the camera, such as in Texas, where it's going to be almost 100 degrees again tomorrow,
Yeah.
um, I've got these other things bubbling in the background that can kind of scratch that itch, so to speak.
Yeah, nice, nice. What do you see as being your greatest influences and the things that have helped you shape your style?
I've talked about this before when I first started out beyond the whole travel photography thing. When I started going down a little bit more the path of nature photography, and that I think it was 2017, I went out for the first time with a group of people from the Dallas photography group that's on Facebook. And that was the first time I ever shot the Milky Way or star trails or anything like that. I started off much like anything when it's new and shiny, you're all in on it. You think, so this is what it's going to be. And I'm going to be the next Michael Shainblum. Back then, that he was primarily focused on that kind of stuff and time lapses, or Sean Parker out in Arizona. But again, things shift over time, and I started becoming more familiar with more photographers just in the space in general, and people like Nigel Danson or Simon Baxter. For whatever reason, I connect very much with a lot of the UK photographers.
Yeah.
I'm incredibly envious of the woodlands and the opportunity for fog that happens like 3 times a year here in Texas.
Yeah.
But I would say, in terms of my current style, I guess you could even say, again, another UK guy, but Alex Nail, definitely Simon Baxter, a big influence. Joe Cornish, as again, became more familiar with the names in the space and
Yeah.
going down those rabbit holes. I really liked their style of, some of them you could argue there's that subtle painterly effect, but it's not
Mhm.
so crazy over the top and getting into crazy overdone Orton effect and things like that. So I think just naturally I've evolved over time, where in the early days I would really force edits, and it was more centered around the fact that I wasn't putting myself in the right place at the right time with the right conditions, or what have
Yeah.
you. So the photos themselves to begin with were very just flat and blah. I'll just paint in some light or really ratchet up the contrast or the saturation or whatever. But again, just evolving over time and learning, going back to why I'm a photographer, why I shoot, I want to share my experiences. So if I'm quote unquote falsifying those experiences or making them out to be something that I didn't really see and witness and feel, that type of editing wasn't resonating with me. And
Yeah.
quite frankly, too, it's a hell of a lot more work as opposed to coming home with some shots that are already well composed and you found the right moment with the right light, or the
Yeah.
right composition or what have you, and they're a heck of a lot easier to edit than
Yeah.
trying to
Nothing better than opening up a file and going, all right,
right, maybe
bang.
put the standard profile on, a couple
I'll
tweaks and
adjust the
I'm good. So
contrast slightly.
yeah, so where I used to, gosh, I would spend hours and hours on a single photo,
Yeah.
and honestly at the end of the day it still wasn't very good. But it's the whole trying to polish turd analogy.
Hmm.
And now it's not uncommon for me. I can sit down and pretty much feel like I've got the edit more or less done in maybe 15, 30 minutes max. And it depends on the scene too. Like I've been doing
Yeah.
a lot of editing of green photos. You can see this one on my screen here of lush forest and things of that nature. I find scenes like that with a lot of green are a little bit harder to process and get looking right. So it depends. It's a lot more fun and fulfilling to come back from a trip with hundreds of frames and be able to sit down and knock through them pretty good. And I still let things
Yeah.
percolate and come back with fresh eyes and everything to take a look at it when my eyes aren't bleeding colors after sitting at the computer monitor for a few hours editing. But for the most part, with my style where it's at now and the representational photography I try to embrace, my editing process is pretty quick and not dirty, but just quick and to the point, and I can get in and get out and move on to the next thing much,
Yeah.
much, much quicker than I used to be able to.
Yeah. And I think what you said earlier about being able to get most of it right in camera and say, okay, I've got the right light, I've got my composition nailed, I don't need to do too much to this, is a great thing. That said, some people go down that artistic route. Has that been, you mentioned that you played around a little bit in that space early on. Is that an area that you still play around in at all?
If I do, it's going to be either on black and white
Yep.
or much, much smaller scenes that are not representative of the grid or experience as a whole. If I
Yeah.
see just a little vignette of leaves and rocks or
Yep.
whatever, I might play with the contrast and colors and things like that more than I would on a broader vista, certainly, or anything like that. I don't shoot a lot of really broad vistas, and again, this is something I've written about recently.
Mm-hmm.
I again, like many photographers, over time I was drawn more and more to the smaller scenes, and for me, my argument always was, hey, if I'm going to these places and taking photos that any person or anyone else can roll up with a cell phone and take the exact same composition, I'm not really exhibiting a whole lot of creativity there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I got my 100 to 400, and that was just like an epiphany moment. And I think the first year I had it, something like 75, 80% of the photos I published that year were all with the 100 to 400. But then over time, again, having that push and pull between what got me into photography and wanting to share my experiences and realizing that I'm coming home from these trips with a bunch of photos that, while I think they're beautiful and I believe other people would agree,
Mm.
they don't really show the place. They show the soul of the place, but they're not showing the place
Yeah,
itself. So
you're
again,
bringing out
something,
elements as opposed to the experience.
and the analogy I used in the post I wrote was it'd be like rolling up the tunnel view and strictly having a pair of binoculars to your face and never taking in that grand vista. You're just taking in little snippets, not getting that
Yeah,
full experience. But anyways, back to your question. I went on a tangent, but
that's
yeah,
fine.
I especially black and white, I will get far more aggressive in terms of contrast and texture and clarity and all that stuff that I would never really do on a color photo, certainly.
Mm.
Again, I feel like I'm already quote unquote misrepresenting what I saw and experienced because I didn't see and experience it in black and white. So I
Yeah,
feel a
yeah,
little bit more freedom there. And then the small scenes, again, I'm not expecting anybody to go out and try to go to the exact patch of dirt I happen to be standing where I saw this interesting collection of leaves and mud cracks or something and then try
yeah,
to
yeah.
replicate it and then be disappointed because I ratcheted the contrast up too much or something. So it really depends, but typically those two kind of genres or subgenres would be where I really still tend to flex, again, in certain cases, a little bit more creative muscle, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You mentioned before we started the recording that you were heading off to Utah. So
Mhm.
what's the plan there? Is there a plan?
Yeah, so hopefully I'm going to Utah. I don't quite want to discuss it publicly, but yeah, we've got some stuff in our personal lives again that keep rearing up. 2024 has been a
Mm.
heck of a challenge with a lot of stuff going on that hasn't been real fun. And we just got hit with something again a couple weeks ago. But hopefully, I don't know yet for sure, but hopefully I'll be leaving here in about, what is it, 16 days to go to Utah.
Yeah,
And is there a plan other than generally knowing where I'm going? No. And that's something where, again, especially as I moved away from that, oh, I'm going to be an astrophotographer, where you have to do a lot of planning
yep, yep.
and research and pulling out photo pills and everything. I have found that going in with very minimal plan. Like I said, I know the region I'm going. I
Hmm.
know vaguely where I will go to find campsites on BLM land where you can free camp. But other than that, I don't have anything there. And I find it it can be more challenging, but it's also more interesting because you don't have those preconceived expectations built up of,
Yeah.
okay, I'm going to go out for this specific thing. I got to have this epic sunrise or amazing sunset or dramatic clouds or whatever that you may preconceive in your mind's eye. And then you get there and none of that happens. And I was finding myself doing that, even just going out locally and making myself miserable because I would just get angry and frustrated and fed up, and I would shut down completely photographically or creatively. And I would come home with either just one or two, just I guess I got to take a photo kind of thing,
Hmm.
or I would not even take the camera out of the bag, and I wouldn't be looking around me to find, hey, here's this little small vignette on the ground, like I was just talking about, that
Yeah.
could be something of interest that you could frame up and have a nice composition. I would just be looking for, okay, well, I'm going to go to this overlook and get there at sunset, and there's going to be big, beautiful clouds and brilliant oranges and reds and everything, and then it not happen, and I just go, this is pointless, and I go home and
Yeah.
pout. So
I think,
I have definitely adapted very much to, I'm just going to show up. I'll do a little bit of research. I'm fairly familiar with this part of southern Utah where I'm planning on going at this point, but there's still areas. I've only been going there a few years, so there's still plenty of areas that I haven't personally been to. So I've familiarized myself with places, but I'm not like pre-scouting compositions or looking at other
yeah,
people's
right.
work necessarily to say, oh, I want to go there and get that shot with those conditions, because odds are it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So I just find it much more relaxing and enabling and really empowering from a creative standpoint to just show up and go, okay, here I am. I'm going to start wandering. I'll go on a hike down this trail and see what I see, and go from there. It's not for everybody, but that's how I really find that I operate the best from a
Mm.
creativity standpoint.
Yeah. I think every landscape photographer kind of goes through that phase of I'm going out, I'm going to see this, and I want to get that shot of whatever it happens to be, whatever
Right,
that
right.
iconic landmark or scene happens to be, and
Yep.
finding themselves going through that cycle of disappointment and realizing, hey, you're going to get the conditions you're going to get, and you better learn to deal with it. And I
Right.
think that's an important lesson for a lot of people in
Hmm.
starting out in landscape photography is not necessarily, and I want to separate that from pre-visualizing an idea or a concept of what
Hmm.
it is that you want to capture from
Yeah.
I've set these expectations and this is what I want to see and this is what I want to get conditions wise. And if those things don't happen, then I'm going to get rather disappointed. And
Right. Yeah.
I think
It's the whole. No, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think in moving on from that disappointment phase and that uh, setting expectations phase to saying, okay, whatever the conditions are, I'm going to shoot regardless.
Hmm.
I tend not to go out in horizontal rain because that's just
Yeah,
not.
I'm a little bit of a wimp when it comes to stuff like that. And of course, in Australia,
I
of
don't
course,
mind a bit of
the joke.
rain, but yeah,
Right. In
the
Australia, the
horizontal
joke
stuff's
is
not
you
fun.
step outside and you're going to get attacked by whatever weird animal is down there and kill you. Here in Texas, if you go out in a bad storm, you might get hit with softball size hail. So,
Well,
I'm
that's
I'm
it. Yeah.
pretty cautious when it comes to going out locally in bad weather. And where I go in southern Utah, especially some of those areas you don't want to be when there's a chance of bad weather because of the flash flooding and that. But
Yeah.
back to the pre-visualization thing, the first trip I went on where I really embraced that was back in 2020. I went to the Out of Yosemite conference put on by the Out of Chicago folks. And going into it, of course, I've been looking at the forecast. So I already knew that it was very likely we were going to have clear blue skies the entire week we were there, which is not what anybody hopes for, of course, going to Yosemite with the amazing grand views.
Yeah.
But in my mind, and that was actually the first trip too, I had the 100 to 400, so I was excited to try that out and knew I'd be looking at some smaller compositions just inherently through that. But in my mind, I equated it to, I assume you're familiar with the Blue Angels. Blue Angels preparation where they're all sitting together and they're going through and pre-visualizing it all mentally, the timing and everything. That's how I correlated it to, and I'd be driving to work and thinking, okay, well, if I've got blue skies, I've never been to Yosemite, so all I really know about it are the iconic spots.
Yep.
But what kind of other things could I look for to not necessarily take advantage of the blue skies, but to still be creative and find those compositional opportunities when faced with blue skies in this location where, of course, everybody wants the dramatic fog and mist in the valley and stunning sunset skies, which I was fortunate to have the first night I arrived there.
Nice.
That was the only time I really saw clouds, but just yeah, like I just remember being in the car driving to and from work when I was still at the corporate job at that time, and just really thinking, like, oh, yeah, this sounds hokey, but take on that mindset of that Blue Angels pilot crew or whatever, visualizing what are you going to do in this scenario? What's at this step? What's at that step? A little bit different, obviously, in terms of I'm not counting seconds to bank right and left,
Yeah,
everything, but just putting myself in that place and time to preload some things in the back of my little creative consciousness that I could hopefully pull out when I was there on the ground, so to speak.
yeah. Cool. One of the things that I'm interested in is that link between communication and photography. And as we've already alluded to, you're quite the communicator with your written words, etc. Do you try to shoehorn stories into your photography, or do you let the photography tell its own story to the viewer?
Very occasionally I'll go out with maybe, oh, if I could find something like this and just have a hazy visualization in my mind. Occasionally I'll go out with something like that in mind, but it's still not anywhere near that level of setting some crazy expectation for conditions or whatever ahead of time. But
Sure.
typically speaking, and especially since I do go out with really no plan, and I referenced it earlier, if people ask what kind of nature photographer I am, I'm leaned into the whole I'm a reactionary representational photographer, a mouthful, but I react to what I'm given as I'm just out walking, hiking, whatever, driving along, and I see something, I pull over, and I'm looking for representing what I saw and experienced and felt and everything. But I have found, especially, I mentioned 2024 has been a crazy year. Really, I'm taking this on a tangent, but it's related.
Yeah, that's fine.
Since I've gone full time,
Tangents are us.
Yeah, exactly, I'm great at those. So, since I went full time photography at the beginning or the end of January of 2022, I was actually just saying this to my partner Heather just last week when we got hit with this latest little challenge in life. It almost feels like I've been a bit snake bitten in terms of luck in my life. And that first year, I had health issues that really went throughout the year that really held me back in terms of what I was hoping to accomplish and get out and do and everything. The next year, right as I was getting myself on an upward swing, I took a slide back again. And then, the dog that I had is my first dog that I had as an adult out of living at the parents' home. We had to say goodbye to her. Then at the start of this year, my mom out of nowhere, we went and visited at the end of January. Everything was fine. And by end of March, she was gone. So there's been a lot of loss and gut punches and emotions and everything. And I've found that all of that has made me, again, I'm not going out looking for very specific things, but just themes or ideas that correlate back to those feelings of loss. And last year, when our dog got sick, we just had this phenomenal wildflower season in North Texas here. Really nothing I've ever seen. And I remember driving around one day, just running errands, and then thinking, I'm not a religious person, I'm not a spiritual person, but still, you have nice thoughts. And it was like, this is so great that we're having this wildflower season for Lucy, our dog. And when she passed, the first time I went back out to photograph, when I was running errands that afternoon, I noticed this beautiful patch of wildflowers within a little wooded area in front of a local school.
Nice.
And I went up there and I photographed and I created made a little series that I called Flowers for Lucy. Still haven't published it. Still haven't even gotten through all the photos, but an example of going out and tying my life story into something like that, and
Mm.
doing that as well with the loss of my mom, which again was totally unexpected. And my dad passed away 10 years ago. Losing that second parent, turns
Yeah.
out, is, at least for me, much harder than
Yeah.
losing the first one. No disrespect to my dad, it hits a little bit harder.
Mm.
And going out again, I was in Utah just for a brief kind of unplanned trip, tied onto a different trip that I went out to Lone Pine, California for a photographer meetup. But even on that side detour I made to Utah to get back to my happy place where I know I can find some peace and solitude and calmness, but still having in mind just that theme of loss and frankly death and everything,
Yeah.
and being at my local park and having that same thing. I've got a photo that is in my new ebook that's coming out, that thing I called it Floral Embrace, but it's very much a scene that I did have visualized of this fallen dead tree branch, but it's surrounded by wildflowers growing up around it. And
Yeah.
that was very much something that I had my mom. My mom's been in the forefront of my mind and all the outings I've gone on since. She was my number one fan, but
Mm.
that is very much the case of going in and having a pre-visualized concept, but also the story kind of tied to it. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I may not even talk about it in the caption of the photo. I probably will, but at least for me, I know the story that is tied to it, and scenes like that, that kind of transitory. Here's the scene of something that has passed on or moved on, but also the renewal that's around it with the wildflowers.
Yeah.
But other than that, that tangent, I would say that probably 90% at least of the quote unquote stories I tie into a photo, if I tie a photo or tie a story into a particular image, really comes about after the editing is done. And oftentimes it's related to trying to come up with a stinking name for it. When I have those mental blocks and I've named 30 photos and I've got to come up with 15 more or something, I'm just wanting to be done with it. But a lot of times as I'm trying to come up with a title, that's when I'm really looking with a lot of introspection at the frame in front of me itself and thinking,
Yeah.
okay, what does this represent? Colleen Minnick, I don't know if you've had her on the show, what else is it, kind of thing. And that's really when I tend to get a lot more introspective, is when I'm trying to title it. And then, okay, if the title itself tells a story, now I feel like I need to help the viewer not understand the story or the title, but just help them step into that little world I created in that process of the editing and titling and everything like that. So again, tangent, but I brought it back.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you. And thank you so much for sharing that. Sorry to hear about your mum.
Thank you.
I guess one of the things, though, that sort of brings to mind for me is the emotional impact of an image for a photographer can have a real distinct effect on how they actually frame up or take a shot, or the kind of things that they're looking for. And I think it's again a really important lesson for people, is to use the emotions that they're having in other parts of their life to
Yeah.
actually feed into what they're doing creatively, because it helps you process, it helps you go through that thinking that you need to go through
Yeah.
to get through periods of loss or periods of pain or whatever that emotional experience actually is. And I think it's very true in writing, it's very true in music, it's very true in a lot of painting and visual arts, is that without any kind of emotion to what you're doing, and the emotions from outside of your art impacting on your art, you're not going to be as creative, I don't think, as you could be by feeding those emotions into that creativity.
Right. Yeah. And I think something important to recognize too, and this is something I have at times felt like I'm a little bit inadequate, is you look at some photographers, and I'm not throwing shade or casting stones or anything, but many photographers, artists, they come up with titles and stories related to the art that to me seem so over the top, out there, but take it at face value, that's truly how they feel and how their mind works. For me, I'm not really
Yeah.
of that nature. I listen to photographers on podcasts like yours, and they talk about these super strong emotions or what it made them think of philosophically or whatever. I'm like, probably 90% of what I photograph is that's a pretty thing. I'm going to take a photo of it and try to do it creatively and uniquely, but it's not inspiring some grand, you know, transcending emotional or spiritual
Yeah,
moment
yeah,
for
yeah.
me or anything like that. And for a long time, that kind of bothered me. I was like, what is wrong? Why don't I feel like this? But I'm at a point now that's not me. So I'm
Yeah, sure.
perfectly fine to accept that. And as I just discussed, like I have other ways or other moments where things do get a little bit deeper for me. But I used to feel like maybe am I really that superficial or that it's just like skipping along without a care in the world or a deep thought to my mind. But again, everybody's different. So just
Yeah,
because somebody that I admire and look up to does that doesn't mean that I automatically have to be that way too. I
no.
wish I had learned that about 3 years sooner than, or I wish I had accepted that and thought of that about 3 years sooner than I eventually did, because it would have taken a lot of angst away from me.
Uh, I want to touch a little bit on photography as a tool for environmental education and advocacy,
Mhm.
and I guess ask you a little bit about what role photography playing in promoting conservation.
Yeah, of course, at least here in the United States, the person everybody's going to put up on the pedestal is Ansel Adams, and
Yep.
not just for his photography, but what he brought to the table in terms of that conservation awareness and whatnot. So I think there's still in this day and age tremendous power and opportunity there, but I do think just as with everything in modern times and current times, it's probably harder as well because there's so much noise and so much distraction.
Sure.
And I'll be the first to admit it, like I struggle to sit down and read something that's more than a few minutes long in terms of article or anything. How do you capture and engage an audience sufficiently enough to really drive that awareness as opposed to posting something up and sharing, you know, useful, thoughtful, whatever, scary information that people need to know, but
Mm.
getting them instead of double tapping and swiping on, getting them to actually pause and read it and take a look. And that in the comments all the time where somebody, will post the photo for attention or whatever, or Instagram because you have to have a photo, and
Yep.
people are commenting on what a beautiful shot it is, and it's so amazing. You're such a great artist, and in the caption, if they'd taken the time to read it, it's some like heartbreaking story of either loss in their life or
Yep.
an environmental issue they're trying to bring awareness to. So I think there's just everything. It seems like it's so much harder to get that attention span and focal point. And unfortunately, we very much live in a world where it feels like you have to break everything into that 5-second soundbite.
Yeah.
But in life, much like nothing is black and white, or very little is black and white, there's a whole heck of a lot of gray in the middle. You can't have deep, thoughtful, informational, educational conversations with people, or even just captions or articles with people if they just want to read 2 sentences and move on, because
Yeah.
a lot of these situations are so nuanced and complex, and whatever stance you may fall on, like, oh, this is A and everybody should think this, but you start going down that rabbit hole a little bit further and you realize that there is another viewpoint, or there's, again, maybe there's some in between ground where some compromise
Yeah.
can be made or what
Exactly.
have you. Man, I think it's a tool. It's a tool that, frankly, where I feel some inferiority of late is in this area. Is I go to these places that I love. I love Southern Utah. I love the BLM land. I'm able to roam out there, and I'm
Mm.
vaguely aware of some stuff going on that may change access or what have you, either for the better or for the worse, from a nature standpoint, from a recreation standpoint. North Texas ain't the prettiest and most photographic or photogenic, but I'm really fortunate. 20 minutes away, I've got a local park, slash woodland, whatever you want to call it, that
Nice. Yeah.
has been very good to me photographically over the years. And looking at it during the pandemic, 2020, the park was mobbed. There was trash everywhere. Other photographers were going up and doing photos and leaving confetti and all kinds of junk around.
Yeah.
And you just want to stand in the middle of people and just like scream, "What are you doing?" But it's how do you get that message out without A, being preachy, and B, being just like, "Oh yeah, we get it,"
Yeah, he's
and
the
people
crazy
start tuning you out.
environmental
Yeah,
guy.
there's the crazy guy in the street corner again.
Yeah.
But something, whether I do it through writing or captions or storytelling through my photography, I do feel that I it is incumbent upon me to be a better steward and a better voice for the lands that the land that I love, the areas that I love and everything. It's just how do I do it effectively,
Yeah.
and how do I do it maybe a little differently than what's already out there, because I don't know. Everybody's in a camp these days. You've got your conservative or your conservation camp, you've got your fossil fuel camp, or whatever you want to say.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
And it's so hard to get anybody to look at the viewpoints outside of their own little camp, and I'm guilty of it too. I'd love to be able to just snap my fingers and come up with some way to bridge those divides, but it's certainly something I have been thinking about it a lot, again, especially this year. And maybe it's just looking at my own mortality and what am I going to leave behind at the end of the day with all the loss I've dealt with over the last 18 months or so. And I'm only 46, but suddenly it feels like, oh gosh, that's I'm probably more than midway through my life here.
Yeah.
What can I
Wait till you get to
do?
60 like me.
Yeah, some days I feel like I'm already there. But anyways, I'm going on, but I think it's an incredibly important thing. I also think it's an incredibly difficult thing, and I also think it's something that I need to personally do a better job of trying to find ways to, even if
Sure.
it's just talking about it and building those little seeds of awareness, and maybe somebody else that is a better speaker or whatever running
Mm.
with the better knowledge, the more scientific knowledge, whatever. And I'm playing a part in terms of at least driving a little bit of awareness, and hopefully providing some thought-provoking writings or in my YouTube videos or something. I just got to figure out what feels right for me, and what might work. It might just be throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing if anything sticks, but I don't know. That has definitely been
Sometimes
weighing on me.
that works.
I do a lot of that.
Same here. I built a very long IT career on doing exactly that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm in a similar boat at times.
Speaking of career, how did you make the decision to go full time? How difficult was it? And I guess one of the key things I'm really interested in is that process of thinking before you made the decision to go full time. What was going through your mind, and how did you actually finally get to the point of saying, okay, I'm pulling the ripcord, off we go?
Yeah. It was something that I had in the back of my mind for a couple of years at least. And again, I've talked about this in other interviews, but in my mind, it was something that was still off in the distance. And taking a step back into my professional, quote unquote, professional, whatever, not self-employed career, because I'd like to think I'm somewhat professional now. Yeah, I'd been with the same company, basically since I was 16 years old. A couple of brief departures, and then I related it to The Godfather. Every time I tried to get back or get out, they pulled me right back in.
Back in.
But for the most part, I loved my time there. And then in 2019, the company was really struggling. We did a massive corporate restructuring. I think almost 15% of the corporate headcount was let go.
Wow.
I made it through the day thinking, oh, whew, I'm great. And I was in a job I loved. I had a team I loved. And then I get pulled into an office and I'm told that my position was eliminated. However, they had another opportunity for me. I'll talk about conflicting emotions, hearing
Yeah.
that the position that you loved, and frankly, I figured it was going to be gone. So when I was still standing by mid-afternoon, I was a little surprised and grateful, and then suddenly getting pulled in for a different conversation. But I was very thankful. I am very thankful that they saw in me a reason to offer another opportunity. The challenge with it was I had no idea really what the opportunity was. I had been working in HR, human resource, information systems.
Mhm.
This was in IT. I had a very vague description of what it was going to be, no job description or anything like that. But at the end of the day, it was like, I can go with no job, or I can take this and see what comes of it.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, and there were a lot of factors that came into play from that point in 2019 until I left at the end of January 2022. We had the pandemic and all the uncertainty
Yeah.
there, and the stresses and everything. But at the end of the day, the role was not anything as it was presented to me as. And I don't think that's really anybody's fault, not to debate it here. I don't think really anybody necessarily knew what it was going to be. It was a newish role.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it certainly wasn't what I had hoped it would be. In many regards, it felt like a significant step back in my career.
Uh-huh.
And it just got to a point where, frankly, things were untenable. I was miserable. I was on call and working late nights and weekends and holidays because something would break and you've got to jump on that emergency call and sit there and wait for things to get fixed.
Yeah.
Again, tangents, but that's a very long-winded way of saying that it didn't come about in any way, shape, or form in terms of how I'd really planned it. Now, the one plus or advantage that I had going into ultimately leaving when I did was the company had been struggling for several years. And I'd been with the company a long time. A lot of people had been with the company a long time. And common conversation was like, what's the next 5 years look like? What's the next 10 years look like? So I had been setting aside an extra safety net, so to speak,
Yep.
for several years already. So it wasn't when I wanted to, but I was in a position that I could. Where I was really off course was financially, I was going to be okay for a little while.
Yep.
But from a business standpoint, I hadn't done what I thought I'd be doing over the next 3 to 5 years to try to grow my business and get things to a point financially from a photography standpoint that I felt I could take that step away from the corporate life
Sure.
and easily transition to photography. So it was very much kind of that I've heard other people cuss them, oh shit moment. And now what do? I'm a full-time photographer all of a sudden. Shoot, I don't really even have a full business plan mapped out or anything like that. So I was
Yeah.
very much, behind the eight ball and trying to catch up. So I don't think my intent, I don't think was very different from anybody that was thinking about going full time. Just my timeline got accelerated a little bit in
Sure.
terms of I was absolutely miserable and things just got to a point where I had to step away. Yeah, it was a unique position. It was certainly not anything I would recommend other people follow suit in terms of, like I said, not being ready on the business side. I had some print sales here and there. I had a little bit of ad revenue trickling in, but yeah, nothing to even make a car payment, let alone live on. So, very much, I still feel, what is it, 2.5, coming up on 3 years later, I'm still not where I really want to be. I feel like I'm laying the foundation. The building is still being built, unfortunately, while I'm living in it. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
been very much a catch up. And then, like I alluded to, my health issues and everything, like I've had hurdles and obstacles that I've had to overcome that have, I feel, held me back from where I would have liked to have been, certainly by this point. But I'm getting there. You see those glimmers of hope, and sometimes it is a step forward and 5 steps back, but there are those steps forward at least that I feel like there's that momentum kind of building slowly but surely.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people say it takes somewhere between 4 and 5 years to get a business on its feet. What's the main thing you've learnt from starting your own photography business?
Um, Probably the biggest thing, frankly, is just how different it is to be a self-employed business owner versus working for a corporation where I always had a boss and I
Yep.
was very self-driven and motivated, but ultimately there are always company initiatives, directives, goals, profit targets, whatever, um, tasks to be done, yada, yada, yada. And coming in suddenly, I took a little time to relax after I left the job, just decompress and try to reset mentally.
Sure.
Going into my office here at home and coming in and like spinning in a circle. Okay, what do I do? What am I supposed to be doing today? And I've joked in the past about at, in my corporate world, I was pretty regimented, very to-do list and notes and blah, blah,
Yep.
blah. Then I become the self-employed guy. I'm like, I don't need any of that stuff. Turns out that stuff's actually really important when you're self-employed.
Yeah.
Just fortunately, my background, the company I worked for is a major retailer, and I worked many years on the retail side before moving over to the corporate office. And
Yeah.
as anybody that's worked in especially small box retail will know, is you wear a lot of hats. When I was a store manager, I was loss prevention, I was human resources, I was in some cases maintenance and coaching development, you name
Yep.
it, customer service. In that regard, I had the experience, especially on the retail side, that I think carries over in terms of wearing all those hats. But it's still really different when you're doing it for yourself without operating procedure manual to to kind of guide the way. And frankly, talking to other photographers, I think it's a lot of, not to say a lot of people have landed on luck, but I think with anything like this, luck does play a role.
Oh,
But
absolutely. Yeah.
what is the fortune favors the bold, and luck is the intersection of preparation and whatever hard work. I can't remember what. It's not to say that other people didn't work their tails off to be successful in this space, but I've talked to quite a few where you go for insights and they're, yeah, I did a lot of the things you're doing. It worked.
Yeah.
So there's not necessarily, or at least I haven't found the right peer group. I've got some great peers in a small group now where we can bounce ideas and
And
lament our frustrations, but there's certainly no rule book or map
no, that's
for
it.
how to
And
be a
sometimes it
successful
is
nature
just time.
photographer.
You just have to keep doing
Right,
that
right,
thing for a certain number of years before somebody goes, oh, okay, I'm going to
right,
buy from this guy.
right. And hopefully that savings decline versus the photography income incline, they
Yeah,
line up at
crosses
the
over
right point.
before
Right.
the savings disappears.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
You talked about wearing many hats. How do you manage doing that? Because you're the CEO, you're the chief marketing officer, you're the chief financial officer, chief photographer, et cetera, et
Yep.
cetera. How do you
Yeah.
wear those hats?
Haphazardly. Again, it's something I would say every day is an opportunity to try to get more structure in my, excuse me, in my business life and in what I'm doing day to day from a managing the business versus being creative and artsy fartsy from a photographer standpoint. Um, Certainly being more organized and having my to-do notes I've got taken from my IS and IT days. I've got my kind of Scrum wall where I've got my post-it notes of tasks I
Yep.
want to complete, what stage they're in, and everything. I think the one thing I've struggled with is, again, with the life's challenges, we'll call them, that I've dealt with, especially the loss of my mom. And just recently, I was back home in St. Louis, Missouri, where my parents were, and we had to get the family house of almost 50 years cleared out so that we could get it
Yep.
listed for sale, and then it sold, and all the emotions tied up. And this is the home I grew up in. It's the only family home I've known. And when that heavy life stuff hits me, that's when I get out of my good habits from the business standpoint.
Mhm.
I opened up my planner last week. I was like, shoot, I haven't written a single thing down in my to-do planner for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And it showed, because for 2 weeks I don't know what I'm going to do. And I wasn't in the greatest, headspace to begin with, but it's just that discipline to every day, and it's something I'm trying to work at every day from that behavioral / mental fortitude standpoint of getting up and, what's the plan for today? What are the tasks that I had yesterday that I need to finish up, or that are on my to-do list that I need to start, or what have you? It's just the discipline is probably the biggest thing, I think, and knowing when to wear which hat is tricky, right? Because of course, all of us would love to be out photographing and just editing photos and
that's
doing the
it.
fun stuff.
Isn't that what a photographer's all about? You getting
Right.
out.
Oh, so all you do is take pictures? That's cool. Yeah, I would get that on the retail side. I worked for a video game retailer as a store manager or store employee. One of the biggest frustrations was customers coming in, oh, so you just get to play games all the time, right? Man, if you only knew. So it's that discipline and just really working on the behavioral aspects of it for myself, at least, and getting in the routines and sticking with the routines, and especially when life gets tough, because let's face it, life is always going to have its challenges, and especially, it seems as you get older, they just come faster. That makes that routine and discipline even more important. Or the routine and discipline will put you in a position where you can step away for a little bit and focus on what's the most important in your life, and then step right back in and pick up the baton, so to speak.
Yeah. I want to move on to place and where you like to shoot. What's your favorite spot? Do you have one? Is there somewhere that always calls you back and says, okay, I've got to go back there and do this?
So I've mentioned it multiple times already, but of late, the last 2.5, 3 years, has definitely been Utah. I don't know what it is, because really, when you look at it face value, the areas I'm in southern Utah, there's mountains around, but it's not like Colorado, especially like Southwest Colorado or anything like that. You've got the canyons, but from just driving in and stopping somewhere, you've got some very pretty views, but there's also some really barren, there's not a whole lot here views, but there's just some kind of raw beauty about it. And then, as I've mentioned, let me get my tea here real quickly. I'm getting scratchy. As I've mentioned, it's become my happy place, partly through familiarity. I'm very much a creature of habit. When I go someplace and I love it, I want to go back and I want to go back, and I don't need to go to these other places. If I could go to Ireland every 3 months, I'd probably go to Ireland every 3 months, because that's where I found my love for photography. But yeah, Utah, it's that solitude, the quietude. Eric Bennett's latest book probably says it best. What is it? Space, Stillness, Silence. I'm butchering it. I don't know where I've got the book right now, but those 3 things, you can drive out of Page, Arizona, and within 45 minutes, I'm on Cottonwood Canyon Road, and I may not see another car for hours on end, and I can go out hiking in the canyons, and I might see some people here and there, but then I've gone other days where if I didn't go into a town, I didn't see a single soul. It's just, there's just a calmness and a peace about it, along with when you do start to see the kind of not in your face beauty of the locations. I've just got a tremendous appreciation for that place right now. But like I said, it's also for me a thing of familiarity. I've always been like that. My partner and I, we went to Italy, and I'm like, all right, every vacation now we're going to Italy. She wants to go other places, but for me, it's that, hey, I know this is great, so let's just go back there. But like I said, if I was living in Ireland, quite likely I would just be perfectly content to go around and photograph in Ireland, because that was my first muse, or whatever you want to call it. But definitely Utah. I really hope I can get on this trip in a couple weeks. I could use it. And then the photography is secondary, that comes along with it naturally.
If you could retire at one of the places you've shot, which would it be?
I'd pretty much without hesitation Ireland, if I had to choose any place. Love it, love the people, love the food, love the scenery, obviously. I joke, one of the not one of the last things I did in my old HR systems role, but one of the things I worked towards was we had international projects going on, and I got one of my U.S. employees relocated over to Ireland. And I always joke it was the dumbest thing I ever did. I should have relocated myself. So I just, yeah, I've loved I've been to Brisbane, Australia for work.
Yep.
Haven't done a lot of photography there. Been to Italy and Germany, and I've been fortunate to go to these different places. But from a photography / just personal love of place, Ireland is definitely, it will always hold a special place because it's what gave me photography essentially.
Yeah.
And just the 3-4 times I've been there, I've just absolutely loved my time there, from the people to the scenery to the history and everything else. I wouldn't mind retiring there.
I'd agree. If I could retire in the Ring of Kerry somewhere, I'd be a very happy man.
That would be pretty nice, right? So I probably shouldn't be talking about it because I feel like it's an overlooked thing from a photography standpoint, but starting to see more tours going there, and oh no, it's going to become the next, Mesa Arch or whatever, crazy Iceland. So.
What's the most memorable experience you've had out?
Most memorable experience. The first one that comes to mind it didn't necessarily result in like my best, like one of my favorite photos. It's a favorite photo just from the experience standpoint.
Sure.
Back in 2018, when I was still very rough around the edges from a photography standpoint, I had a business meeting in Salt Lake City, Utah. So I decided to fly in a couple days early to Vegas, rented a car, and then I drove up over, I'm terrible about geography, but anyways, I ended up driving through Utah. I went to Bryce Canyon for the first time. I went to the north rim of the Grand Canyon, and it was there that I had one of the most powerful, just full-on adrenaline rush experiences from a photography standpoint. I've been exploring around, of course, doing the touristy thing of shooting from the overlooks, and I've got no photos from there that I would actually appreciate now so much. But as I was walking back to the car after sunset, I heard some people talking about smoke in the distance. Didn't really think too much of it. Come around a little bend and across, I guess it's like a side canyon off of the main north rim of the canyon.
Yep.
Sure enough, there's a wildfire on the far side, quite a distance away. I sat there and I shot it. I got my 7200 out and got some close-up shots of the wildfire in the trees, which I really like that shot. Although obviously it's not necessarily a happy moment, but
yeah.
And I kicked myself for it. I took the 70-200 off, put the 24-70 on, and set up my intervalometer to just fire off shots. Because also in the distance, off to my left, so the fire was pretty much straight ahead, quite a ways away.
Yep.
Off in the distance to my left were flashes of lightning. So first in my mind, I'm like, it'd be really cool if I could get some lightning or something with the fire. And of course, I wasn't prepared, so my battery is, inching down towards dead, and it's flashing at me. And I've got the camera just firing off. I don't even think I had my tripod. I think it was sitting on a stone wall along the path. And I was watching the back of the screen, not really paying attention at that point. Camera died. I knew when the battery died, I had seen a flash, but I hadn't seen the actual lightning or anything like that. So I go back to the car, and I'm looking at the back of the camera with a fresh battery, because of course, why would I put a new battery in while I was shooting? Never even crossed my mind. And on the back of the camera, the last shot, I think it was the last shot, I might be misremembering it now, but was the wildfire in the trees and then strike of lightning, multi-prong going into the fire itself. And I just remember sitting in the car just shaking. I had such an adrenaline rush that I actually captured that shot. And it was like nothing I had ever witnessed before, and certainly with a camera had never experienced anything like that before. And the funny thing about it, this also ties into, again, I keep talking about things I've written on my blog, but years ago I wrote something about the power of regret, and this is the story that kind of generated that. Was I had gotten in the car to leave before I shot any of the wildfire. And I drove through the parking lot, got to the stop sign to get back onto the little 2-lane highway out of the park. I backed up all the way back through the parking lot and grabbed my camera gear and got back out. And that was the outcome of it, was getting that shot. I actually ended up with 2 frames where I had lightning striking into the fire.
Yeah.
They're not spectacular frames. Of course, I was with the 24 to 70, so they were zoomed out further than I would have liked. But man, that experience and realizing I got that shot, I was up for like hours after that, trying to come off that high, just shaking like a leaf because I had all that adrenaline rushing through me. So that's probably, I think that's got to be the most memorable. I've seen some incredible locations. When I went to Yosemite, I just by pure dumb luck rolling up with this incredible sunset and having literally like 7 minutes to get the camera gear out of the car and set up and get the shots. And that was certainly up there, but nothing I don't think has given me quite that that body shaking experience of that wildfire with the lightning striking into it.
Oh, fantastic. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
What about horror stories? Have you had any dramas while you're out shooting?
I was thinking about this because I knew you were going to ask this, and I can't really think of any from a photography standpoint. Really, like I said, and I feel like I'm at a point where I've talked about this stuff and written about it where I don't want to just keep harping on it, but
Yeah.
really it's been everything that's happened outside of photography in my
Yeah.
life. It's just been kind of those one thing after another. And turns out when I'm feeling a lot of grief or feeling depressed or whatever, it's really hard to find that motivation or creative spark or anything.
Yeah.
So that's probably really, from a photography standpoint, just been the biggest thing, is dealing with those life challenges that are, again, they're part of life, but they're not tied directly to the photography. I really can't, knock on wood, I've never, had a tripod fall or camera break or anything like that. I can't really think of anything like in the field missing some great shot because I screwed something up. I guess I've been fortunate in that regard, and maybe I don't take enough risks, but it's just been all the junk and crap that's been going on outside of the photography side of things that have just been like, can I just please, even 6 months with a little bit of a break. Yeah, not to be the Debbie Downer, but I really think it's just everything that has happened over the last couple of years.
Understood. Have you ever hit a creative wall? And if so, have you got any strategies that you've used to get over it or around it?
Yeah, so the one that comes to mind initially was, again, back in 2020. Of course, we all know what came about. I was in Yosemite at the end of February, and we're all standing around talking about, do you hear about this virus outbreak in China? That's just crazy. I think it had just impacted a nursing home up in Seattle at the time. But of course, at that time, none of us thought anything of it. And then here's this tsunami of turmoil and upheaval and craziness and, doubt and uncertainty, fear, yada, yada, yada. Of course, I think for just like a lot of people, 2020 was definitely a very strange year and a very odd year. And I wasn't able to go see my family and whatnot. And I'd gone to Colorado midsummer, and that was fine. So somewhere between then and then my partner and I went to Colorado to Breckenridge just for personal vacation, whatever. And of course, me being a photographer, I had to take my backpack and all my gear. But I just was not, I hadn't been feeling it. I don't think I'd even shot anything since the summer trip to Colorado. And it was circumstantial. I was fortunate that while we were there, it wasn't tail end of fall. There was still color on the trees, but it certainly wasn't peak or anything like that, but still just really beautiful. And outside the Airbnb, we had a condo complex. I can't remember the name of the river, but just a river, really a stream running along. And one afternoon, it started snowing, and I grabbed my camera, and that was 2020 was really a year where I went from the whole spray and pray, shoot everything handheld and high ISO, and I don't need a tripod, I work fast, blah, blah, blah. And then realizing that slowing down actually benefited me tremendously and really is what I saw as a huge springboard in my progress as a photographer. But again, I hadn't been feeling it for a few months. So I just went out and went back to that handheld. I had the 70 to 200 on the camera, didn't switch lenses or anything. I ran around in the snow like an idiot, just on burst mode, firing handheld, firing off. I probably took 1,500 shots in the span of 35 minutes.
Wow.
But it was exactly what I needed when I needed it. And, without the snow shower, I probably wouldn't have done that. Like I said, it was definitely circumstantial, but I knew that what I had been doing wasn't working right then and there. So let's change it up. Let's go back to handheld. Let's go back to shooting on high speed burst and see what happens. And it jolted me out of it. And then I went right back to the tripod and more slow and deliberate approach after that. But that's probably the biggest time I've really had a creative drought. With the processing I do these days, like we were talking earlier, like it's not like I'm sitting there with a blank slate or a really flat, boring photo to begin with, and I'm trying to carve it into something really special and different. So, I don't get too many ruts in terms of processing. It was really that just pandemic and everything going on. And at that point, we knew, like, when I moved to Texas, I had promised my parents I'd always be back for birthdays and holidays, and knowing that wasn't going to happen. Again, the external factors, but man, that spray and pray that did the trick on that trip. Just the advice I give others is, if you find yourself in that rut, just do the opposite of what you're normally doing. If you're normally shooting grand vistas, shoot small scenes. If you're shooting small scenes, just find something different to do, to find a way to reignite that spark and get the passion and excitement back again.
Nice. Great advice. Thanks, Michael. What do you see as the biggest challenge facing photographers right now?
I think trust. Again, going back to the whole authenticity thing and AI, and it's easy to say, oh, people have been falsifying things for years with Photoshop and everything. And then, yeah, that's true. That was an early lesson I had from when I was starting out in photography, and wonder why my stuff wasn't looking like a lot of what I was seeing on social media, and then realizing that a lot of what I was seeing on social media wasn't real.
Yeah.
That was a rude awakening. But with the advent of AI, especially now, generative remove and generative fill and all this stuff, amazing technology. But how do you foster trust with your viewers and your audience? If you're presenting yourself as a representational photographer, as I'm trying to do, how do you foster that trust with your quote unquote true fans, whatever, new people coming into your work, etc., when we live in a world where very soon, frankly now, you look at a video online, you really can't necessarily know for sure that it's real.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And talk about tangents, that's a whole other separate tangent from a social, economic, and political standpoint. But from a creative art standpoint and photography standpoint, it's I think it just, again, it's going to go back to that one word, is trust. That's why I started doing the trip reports. That's why I started wanting to do the videos for my YouTube channel. I always thought I was never going to do infield videos. I didn't want to distract from the photography. It turns out I do them. I do them more as a vlog than anything else. But wanting to take people behind the curtain, behind the scenes with me, and hey, you see this photo? Here's some cell phone snaps of the same scene where I was composing it, or here's my YouTube video from the day that I was in that location and taking.
Here's me standing by the camera
showing
showing you what it looks like. Yeah.
Exactly. It's more work. It's it's not necessarily, actually, really, I've enjoyed doing the field videos, surprisingly, considering I always said I was never going to do them. But I think it's just the more open and honest you can be. And unfortunately, that may mean that photographers and artists that don't want to have that connection or that openness may not foster the same level of trust. You could say the same argument about social media, and you've got to have this big personality and in your face and raw, and I'm more low key. I'm not going to do reels, and that may be a detriment to me. But at some point, you also got to recognize what's comfortable and right for you as the creative and as the person. But I really think you look at how quickly the AI stuff is advancing. I think the next, normally I would say 3 to 5 years, but really probably 1 to 3 years, I think are going to be really interesting. And
Mm.
I think one of the things I've seen is people that follow me, I'm friends with them on Facebook or whatever, and I see them sharing stuff that is very obviously AI generated.
Yeah.
And some of them, I'm not going to be the guy that calls it out on someone's post that I don't know. But if I know the person well enough, I might just say, hey, that's awesome. It's AI, just FYI. And a lot of times it's fine. That it's I didn't know it was AI, but it's still a beautiful scene or whatever. Is how do you build that foundation of trust, but also how do you goes back to the conservation discussion we had. How do you
Yeah.
help the non-photographers that are viewing your work and maybe buying prints or watching your videos, whatever? How do you, and doesn't matter that you do, make them appreciate the authentic, real things versus the admittedly very pretty, beautiful, can be stunning things coming out of some prompts typed into a keyboard
Yeah.
online? Because if they think it's beautiful, who am I to rain on their parade, so to speak?
Well, that's it. Yeah.
But at the same time, where I do get a little, I guess, philosophical is I already think we're going down a very scary and potentially sad path of losing the human connection. And
Yeah. Yeah.
if you take the humanity out of the creation of art, yes, you still may have the vision in your mind and everything, but I know there's arguments, well, it's not fair to say that, you know, using prompts and finding creativity through that isn't art, but it still feels a large step at the very least disconnected from the pure humanity of what we've typically seen as art. And maybe I'm just not looking
No,
at it, you know, deep enough or whatever, but
I'm
um,
totally with you.
yeah.
I look at it and I had a bit of a play around with it and wanted to
Hmm.
understand it both from a not a deep technical perspective, but I'm been into technology for most of my career, and so
Hmm.
therefore had an interest in, okay, so what is this stuff actually all about? And the
Yeah.
problem I always come back to is, whose art is it really?
Right.
Because yes, you can come up with a prompt and there's ways of tweaking a prompt that can be quite creative. I get that.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, isn't it the guy that wrote the algorithms work that you're actually leaning on, or the guy whose photography or art that the AI was trained on, who
Yeah.
actually has the most input into how that image ended up getting created?
Yeah.
Fair enough if you've
Very much a gray zone on this one.
exactly, yeah.
You
If
know,
you've
and
fed your own image in, I get it.
mhm,
You've had a lot to do with that. Or you've had a lot more to do with it, but it still comes back to the guy that wrote the algorithm, or the
mhm,
team that wrote the algorithm, is the one that's done most of the work in making that happen.
yeah. I think ultimately it comes down to, as a viewer, are you personally interested? Do you care about whether it was a real authentic experience
Yeah,
that's being represented? And that could be the same for photography or art or
sure.
sculpture, whatever, versus do you just want a pretty print for your wall or your screensaver or what have you? The other flip side of it is AI. You talk about digital photography was democratization of photography versus film. AI can be that from an art standpoint too for somebody that is, you know,
Oh, definitely.
physically incapable of going out and creating art, whatever form of art it may be, but they've got the ability to interface with a computer. Now suddenly they've had a whole pathway open to them, a doorway
Absolutely.
open to them to create things that they never could have. It may have been in their mind, but they can never express it. So
Mm, mm.
yeah, again, this is definitely not a black and white, and you know,
Oh
I'm
no,
conflicted on it, but I still think there is in most cases of created quote unquote art through artificial intelligence or misrepresentation of things, again, with generative remove and you know, just pure image generation and expand
yeah,
and everything, there is a loss of the humanity, the realness, the authenticity that matters to me. And I think it matters to a lot of people, but again, this is where I do tend to get a little philosophical, but we're in a society now where the human connection is not necessarily valued.
yeah. Yeah.
The things like Uber Eats and having your meals delivered and doing everything, just have it come to me. I'm going to open the door when the person's gone. I don't want to interact with anybody. Like, I'm an introvert, don't get me wrong, but I love going out to a restaurant, even if the service ain't great. Like, I like being
Yeah.
around people. I like when the service is great, you've got a chance to interact and chat with somebody or whatever.
But you're
I'm very
usually
much
there
about the human
with
connection.
friends or family or whatever. It's that social
Mhm.
interaction that that experience is all about. Yeah.
So, do I want that kind of less personal aspect of where we seem to be going
Mm.
creeping into the photography and the art I appreciate too? I don't
Yeah.
think I do. So,
What's
I
the
told you I can
best?
go on tangents.
Yeah, as I said, tangents are us. I'm okay with the tangent. What's the best or worst piece of advice anyone's ever given you?
Oh man, I don't want to do this, but my oldest sister, we did a siblings trip to England back in 2008, and I will give her credit. Missy, if you hear this, I'll probably hear all about it and you'll gloat, but she was the first person that I ever heard say, always look behind you, because that might be where the best photo is.
Yeah, right.
And damn it, if she wasn't right.
Yeah,
I can't
definitely.
tell you how many times that I've gotten an amazing photo because I was focused over there, but I looked behind me or I looked off to the side and, oh my God, there's this incredible thing going on over here that I missed or just happened or whatever. So this is a rare instance of I'll give my big sis credit for giving some good advice
Nice.
of always looking behind me. That it is, whether I was starting out and just shooting with my cell phone or to this day, even when I'm out working, that stupid little saying, I still remember her saying that to me in
Mm.
England. God, what is that now? 16 years ago.
Wow.
Always look behind you. And yep, she was right. That has led to some of my favorite photos.
Yeah,
So
fantastic.
kudos to my big sis. We can edit this out, right?
Sure, if you want. Are there any photographers out there that you think I need to be talking to?
Yeah, so I was scrambling to go through your list of episodes and search for names. So I saw you had Bree Stockwell on
Yep.
with Lynn. I can't remember his name now, but anyways, for their
Lynn
Creative
Metcalf.
Affair podcast. Yeah. But I think Bree is an example of somebody who has just blown me away in terms of the speed of her progression from a photography standpoint
Yeah,
and what
sure.
she's done with her art. Getting her on again, but on a one-to-one basis, I think would be
Mhm.
fantastic. I think she's got some great insights and she is, I've gotten to know her a bit. I've only met her once, but whether she knows it or knew it or not, but she's somebody that has inspired and driven me to continue to push to improve my work and see things in new ways. Because truly, the speed of her progression from just coming into, I'd never heard of her, I think, until a few years ago, and to where she's at now is just phenomenal. So I
Yeah.
always will advise people to pick her brain and listen to what she has to say. Murray Livingston is someone else I've gotten to know, again, remotely.
Yep.
I think he's in Scotland right now, but just phenomenal photographer. Seems like a really good guy. I don't think he's had an opportunity to do a whole lot of interviews yet. I'd love to be able to get him one-on-one with somebody. The lovely women from Outdoor Photo Alliance, Shanda
Yeah.
Aiken, Martha Montiel, and Jeannie Summers. Oh, I'm forgetting her last name now, but anyways, they've started up the Outdoor Photo Alliance. I met them at the Lone Pine Photography Meetup I mentioned earlier. That's where I met Bree as well.
Mm.
Great group of people, really doing some cool things with this new alliance that they've put together. They've got their women's conference coming up in February, and then some other conferences that are cooking behind the scenes as well.
Mm.
I think they recently run another podcast where they had an opportunity to talk about themselves and what they're working towards. Any of them individually would be great, but again, getting them on to talk about a new community, I think that's something, again, I'll self-promote. I wrote recently, it was tied into the Photo Alliance on the photography space, especially when so many people that we get to know are hundreds of miles or thousands of miles away. having that opportunity to build a community and not just feel like you're on your own, especially if, like me, working full time in it now, it's like I can go on a happy hour with other people necessarily from my job. I think anybody that's doing anything around building communities is definitely something to look at. Charlotte Gibb was another one I wrote down. A lot of the names I had thought of, you had already had on, but Charlotte Hamilton Gibb, absolutely love her work. Definitely, actually, you talk about who influenced my style and my editing. And I mentioned a lot of those UK photographers, but Charlotte, Franca Gabler, I know you had on. Their style definitely has influenced me. I love their work. When I was at the Yosemite conference back in 2020, Charlotte had just produced her box set collection of prints, and just absolutely stunning. I'm not one to get emotional and weepy, but I was getting teary-eyed looking at the prints. They were just so beautiful. And Charlotte's got a lot of great insight and everything. Every time I've heard her talk, it's been really good. So I think she'd be a good one to get on there too. So I know you were looking for a few, so I'll leave it there. But again, you've also had a lot of the ones I thought of already on the show. So when you're 160 something episodes in, it gets a little tougher.
Yeah, definitely. You're number 170.
Hey, look at that. I guess that's lucky.
Could be.
Let's hope.
Let's hope so.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for those. It's wonderful to collect a few more names for the list. The list keeps growing, and I don't think I'll run out of people to talk to.
Nope.
One more question, and it's one of the most important questions I think that I've got to ask everyone that comes on the podcast. Do you like pineapple on pizza?
No.
No?
This is the other one I've been waiting for. I'm not a pineapple guy. Just texture, the thought, I've never had it on pizza. I don't like it by itself.
Wow.
Yeah. Maybe it's the greatest thing ever when it's thrown on a pizza, but I don't think you'll ever get me to try it. So.
Oh, we do it on hamburgers as well. So.
Oh, wow. A hamburger is meat, bread, ketchup and mustard, maybe cheese. If it's a good burger, that's all you need. I'm staking my flag on that.
Okay, I'm going to fight you to the death on that. The hamburger with the lot, with the egg, bacon, cheese, lettuce.
Oh,
tomato,
bacon I will accept as well. I'll accept bacon.
Lettuce, tomato, pineapple, beetroot, and the burger patty, of course. And onion, and it's got to be fried. Can't have that.
Okay, so see, I'm evolving. I'm not even evolving. I admit when I'm wrong and I have new information. Yes, as long as the onions are grilled or sautéed, I will accept onion. If they're raw, then they're getting pulled off. I have some very strong feelings about hamburgers. Yeah, exactly.
All right, it's been absolutely marvelous talking to you, Michael. Thank you so much for sharing so much of your journey. Where can people find your work?
It used to be really easy. I would just say go to Michael Rung Photography on everything and you'd find me. But I recently had to restart my journey on Instagram and Facebook thanks to some crazy back-end stuff with Meta. I am now on Instagram as Michael Rung _photography. If you search for Michael Rung, it kills me. I'm paying to be verified on there. So look for the Michael Rung with a blue check mark, and it should be me. On Facebook, don't even bother because nobody seems to see Facebook posts. YouTube, it's Michael Rung Photography. My website is michaelrungphotography.com. I do a newsletter. Used to aim for monthly. Now I pretty much send them out when I feel I've got something to share to say. So it might be weekly, it might be monthly, it might be quarterly. Just if I got something to share, I'll share it. And again, with the fickleness of social media, as I've just gone through in the last couple months with Facebook and Instagram, signing up for the newsletter, visiting my website is the best way to stay abreast of what I've got going on. Although the website needs some updating right now, but it's about to get a bunch of new stuff on there, so stay tuned. And awesome. I think that's everything. Website, social, YouTube. Yeah, I think that's it.
I'll make sure that I get a list on the show notes as well for you.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, the whole Instagram thing especially is, oh man, I was a lot of followers I gave up, but it is what it is.
I thought I was going to have to start again there a couple of weeks ago. I
Mhm.
got my account switched off because of reasons. Uh, yeah, and managed to get it back luckily, but you know,
Yeah.
just the way Meta rolls.
Yep. Yeah, they're not my favorite.
No, nor I. Oh, well, thanks again, Michael. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks again for listening to Landscape Photography World. I hope you enjoyed the show, and keep listening because I'll be joined by some great guests in upcoming episodes. You can find my work in this podcast at grantswinburnphotography.com, along with prints and photography gear and my calendar for 2025. I'm also on Vero, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm Grant Swinburne. Hope to see you out shooting soon.